Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I thought since we were talking about legacy that I would allow our panelists to briefly introduce themselves with how they think their legacy is currently perceived.
Is currently what?
Perceived. Like, what do you think your current legacy is? So it's a way of introducing yourself. So Louis, we'll go with you because you look.
She's starting with a trick question. I like that, yeah. I really understand legacy as being a momentum, and that we are, part of a flow, and I connect my flow with people who've had an influence on me, and also seeing people who I've interacted with. So I kind of see myself in a kind of continuum. And sometimes you don't realize that people are influencing you. So sometimes there are people in books or people that you've just read about or seen their work. Someone like Oscar Michaud. Sometimes they are people who don't do exactly what you're doing, but there are some kind of similarities. I think someone like Pearl Bowser, I kind of feel that I feel her with me. And in terms of going forward, I actually, although I don't know all of them, but the Color Congress young folk, these 20 groups that were founded in the last 5-6 years, I find great affinity with what they do. So I guess I see myself in that continuum, if that's answering that question. Yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't answer the question.
You didn't, but that's okay. Thank you.
I'm not going to answer it either. I was going to say, I think it's for other people to say what my legacy is, but I can tell you what I hope it is, which is actually very close to what Louis said. I want to be a link in the chain in the Freedom Project. That is ongoing and has been ongoing since we got here, will be ongoing. So, yeah, I want to be thought of as having done my part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a more direct question. Louis Massiah, could you tell us a little bit about your origins and career trajectory up to the founding of Scribe Video Center?
Sure. I grew up during the Cold War, and my father was an engineer and contractor, and someone who really believed strongly in knowledge and mathematics and science and engineering as necessary tools to go forward, and something that would be useful for society, and also in the context of the Cold War, which was this, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure there are many, the Cold War was an earlier Russian, really Soviet confrontation with the United States on really economic systems, which economic systems is a better way to organize people, and how political economies would be organized. And so I was interested in it, but I definitely, I studied science and really thought of myself as being, I studied astronomy, and I was particularly interested in cosmology, like how they, and not that I was any great whatever, scientist at that point, but I did take it quite seriously, and I actually, as an undergraduate, sort of TA'd for Carl Sagan, who was an astronomer, and I became really interested in science, films about science. I began working at WNET, which was the public television station in New York, first as like a summer job, a summer internship, and then immediately after graduating, started working there. And among other things, produced like science programs. I really had not taken any film courses. I had made a film in college, but I hadn't really studied film. And I became more and more interested in how time-based media, video in particular, could be used as a way of exploring ideas and concerns in science. So then I heard about this program at MIT, which I thought would be the ideal place for me to like develop media language to explore ideas in science, complex ideas in science that most usually had been expressed by mathematics, but I thought if there was a visual way, then we're all intelligent, we're all smart, but there's something kind of arcane about mathematics that most people don't understand. So that was but that kind of led me into this program there that turned out had no interest in mathematics, but really was interested in direct cinema, in cinema verite. And so I studied film. I got a master's degree at MIT, and then learned about media arts centers while I was in Boston. There was a place called BFVF. But also in New York at that time, there was a place called Young Filmmakers where people could gain access and knowledge to film and video making. Now, I knew independent filmmakers. While I was at WNET, I met a filmmaker named Stanley Nelson, who said, "Oh, you got to go meet this guy named Bill Greaves." And we loved Bill Greaves, but Bill Greaves he came from a different model of filmmaking. And, but I realized that I didn't really know, but the fact that he existed made it possible. So when I graduated and came back to Philadelphia, I got a job producing at the public TV station here in Philadelphia, and sort of Scribe began as kind of a nighttime and weekend activity, really as a way for people who are interested in time-based media in video to come together and work together. Long answer to your question.
And what year was that?
That would have been 1982. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Marcia?
Wow. Well, I grew up in a family, I grew up in New York City, and my parents met at the NAACP in the 1940s. And so that's what I heard, and that's what I grew up around. And then my older brother, I have one sibling, my older brother became very involved in the kind of Black radical movement that was just post the Black Power movement, early 70s into the mid 70s. So that also influenced me a lot. And so I went to college, I studied TV production. I had some internships that were terrible, being the only Black person in sight. I was pretty shy, so I did not know how to navigate those kind of spaces in which I didn't see anybody who looked like me. I graduated with a degree in production. I got out of college, I couldn't get a job. I had intended to go into like public service kind of television. Couldn't get a job. But all through college, I was also a community organizer. So that was really, it was connected to the projects, right? It was always connected to the Freedom Project. That's what it was. So then I made my way through different, policy jobs. I ended up in philanthropy. And then I met my partner, Stanley Nelson. I started working with him on his films. The first one I worked on was the Black Press, Soldiers Without Swords. And it was thrilling to me to be able to do that kind of work. And I pretty quickly said, well, two things. One, this work is a lot more interesting, a lot closer to how I want to spend my time than working in philanthropy, as great as that was in some ways. The other thing that was very evident was it was going to be very tough for both of us to do this and have a family. So that was like on the table, like what are we going to do? And so the original impulse behind Firelight Media, which is 25 years old this year, was how are we going to make this, right? How do we keep doing work and sustain a family and each other? And that's really where it came from. And that was 25 years ago.
Wow, thank you. Are there organizations that you grew up in or worked in that inspired you when creating Scribe and Firelight?
I will say I didn't know organizations that were like what we were trying to do, but I was inspired by plenty of organizations, from movement organizations to organizations like National Black Programming Consortium, now known as Black Public Media, which is now, as you know, really in dire straits because of what happened today, to Third World Newsreel, which was Stanley's fiscal sponsor, but was also an archive of really important documentary footage. So yeah, I was inspired by all kinds of organizations. And now, as Louis said, I'm really inspired by the newer groups and formations that have sprung up since 2014, I'd say, from the killing of Mike Brown forward. So yeah.
Scribe had been formed, but in the early, and I guess in the mid '80s, I was on the board of Deep Dish. Deep Dish was a satellite network. This was pre-internet. This was begun by folks that were involved in public access. And the idea was to buy satellite time, and these were public access stations across the country, to buy satellite time and to beam programs up and then to share it so that there was no internet. So this is how programs could be exchanged. And people like Dee Dee Halleck, were really, really important in the formation of Deep Dish, and Martha Wallner. But the board of Deep Dish included Ada Gay Griffith, who's here. She was here.
Oh my God.
And one of the conversations that we had was when you have organizations, you can start an organization from scratch, or you can, how do you make an existing organization, can an existing organization be transformed so that it is non-racist, non-sexist, non-genderist? How do you, can organizations be transformed? Do you do it gently? Do you do it by coup d'etat? And so really thinking about, and how does an organization relate? So Ada, but she was kind of a provocateur, but really making us think about it, and making us thinking about the organizations that we were with. At that point, Ada was at Third World Newsreel. So some of those conversations are made me really think about, well, what kind of organization I wanted Scribe to be. I also think that Toni Cade Bambara, Scribe began in '82. Toni moved to Philadelphia in '85 and '86, and Toni had been involved in a lot of different organizations, and had hard times. And some she just found the politics, even though they may have been black run, just the politics didn't work. And how do you form an organization? I know one, and I think about this when I think about BlackStar. We had a space, and I at one point said, I don't want to have comfortable chairs because people will just sit around all the time. And
Wait, what does that have to do with BlackStar?
Because you have the most comfortable furniture of any organization on the planet. And Toni said, Lou, it's got to be a place where people want to spend time. It can't just be like hardback chairs, which is my idea of a good workspace.
This is back to the Cold War.
Back to the Cold War, right. So I would say people influence my thinking about how an organization is formed and how we relate to each other. Yeah.
So the name of this panel is Black Media Legacy, Honoring the Past, Shaping the Future. And I'm curious for both of you, what's the responsibility of Black-led or centered orgs what's the responsibility of those orgs with the larger project of liberation? Then the second part of that is, do we need Black-led organizations in the film and media space?
Yes, we definitely do. And I think, in moments like this, the responsibility is crystal clear. You have to relate to the project. You have to play an active role in that larger project of the people. And I think without that, it's not meaningful, which is why I think Scribe has been around so long, and Third World Newsreel's been around so long, Firelight's been around for 25 years, hopefully you got 25 more, is in moments like this is when you really have to dig in and help, right? Be part of what the people are building and what the people are struggling with. So, I think, and more than ever, I think everybody understands media is a kind of indivisible component of the struggle in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I think it's essential.
Yeah, I very much agree. And I think even pushing that beyond just Black-led organizations, Black-led organizations where there is a culture and a clear and public commitment to Black communities, and to make that a criteria for, or more than a criteria, but a rationale for why the work is being done, and to constantly figure out how is this organization useful to Black communities, and not being embarrassed by it. Not, this is why we're here. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add another criterion, which I think is really personified by BlackStar, and that's solidarity, because that is also essential to prevent the people that would from dividing us from those who are our allies. That solidarity has to be very much a part of the culture of the organizations that we lead as well.
Thank you. In this next question, I think it's almost silly to ask, but I want to help the audience kind of think through some strategies. But how do we use media to affect social justice, and how do we respond to the current political climate. And I guess one thing I might add, and Louis, you and I have talked about this a little bit casually, but have we been here before? When you talk about Third World Newsreel, which is 50 years old, and you know, thinking about much older organizations, this current moment has all of these impacts, and is it worse or is it the same as other moments?
I would say in my life, in my work life, this is as bad as it's been. I was just thinking about the Rosenbergs and the execution of these, you know, two people. That was pretty bad, and a government that pretty much, you know, was orchestrated to do that work, and the deportations. This is not the first, you know, mass deportation time, but it's not the same. But I do think that this is an extremely perilous time. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, clearly it's perilous, and I do think it's probably the most perilous in my lifetime, but not the most perilous that we have experienced. And I was just talking to Yvonne Welbon, wherever she is, about, you know, how the fact that we still have people around. I didn't know Ada Gay was here, but we still have people around who can help us understand how to act in this moment. I think it's super important. And old people like us should be put to use to the extent we can be. Because I do think we have history to call on, even in this moment. We have experiences, we have been through, not anything like this, but we have seen some stuff before. We have things to call on. We have practices to call on. We have traditions to call on. You know, I'm sure a lot of you today have heard today that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is officially, which we knew it was coming, but it's officially shutting down. As of October 1, they're out of money. This was by far the single largest supporter of documentary film in the country, by far, and they're gone. And so, you know, those of us in the doc field who have been on edge, worried for the election, are now looking around at a landscape that is drastically altered, is much more constrained, much less hospitable to the stories that we want to tell, hostile to the stories that we want to tell. On the commercial side, and now there will not be a public side. So we're looking at a landscape that not that long ago we thought of as being expansive, and now it's gone. It is essentially gone. With the commercial players running scared of our stories and the public side players shutting down. So it's not pretty where we're at, and yet we have been, you know, we have Oscar Michaud to call on. You know, we have people who, you know, we have Thurgood Marshall to call on. We have the Reverend Jones, whose footage was in Toni Cade Bambara. You know, we have things to call on. We have the experience of independent distribution to call on. Recent, in fact, you know, I'm not talking about in the 30s. I'm talking about in the 70s, right? So we have things to call on. We're going to need all that.
Yeah, I was actually my next question was going to ask about some cultural forebears or movements that we could call upon. So thank you for that, Louis. I don't know if you have any more folks that you want to add. I did want to ask you both, because Firelight and BlackStar, and you just mentioned William Greaves, why is he such an important figure, and are there other figures we should be thinking about?
Greaves is definitely important. Ellis Hazlitt is extraordinarily important. Yeah, I think William Alexander is in the documentary world is extraordinarily important. Who produced the All-American newsreels in the 1950s. This is really prior to television, when news came from newsreels and movie theaters.
Madeline Anderson too.
What?
Madeline Anderson too.
Madeline Anderson, still here. Very, very important. Yeah, there are, somebody, not from the film or video world, but someone I probably would be a lot more entrepreneurial if I really had modeled from him. But Lerone Bennett, you're all too young to remember Ebony, but Lerone Bennett was a...
We know ebony.com.
but was a historian, and but in some ways worked with Johnson Publications to sort of share history. Really important, so that it was not just in the university, not just in historical groups. All of that is quite important, but really made sure that history was accessible in print and something that people could use. But yeah.
Yeah, there are many people. Pearl Bowser comes to mind. That's somebody of mine who will, preserved the work that was hidden. There's plenty of that being hidden. People like Michelle Mateer and Kay Shaw and Kathy Bowser, right, who independently distributed Sankofa, right, or Daughters of the Dust, right? These are people who are still around, right? And I think they have something to offer now.
Haile Garima and Shirikiana Aina. I mean, both continuing to do the work.
Louis, you screened with us at your TCB, the Toni Cade Bambara School of Organizing, and illuminated her saying often, "What is the plan?" So, what is the plan, Louis?
The plan is ongoing. It's funny. I'm going to deflect. I have two nephews here, but I have a third nephew who I think when I don't know if he remembers it. I think he must have been 6 or 7, and met. His name's Tom, and Toni asked him, what his plan was, and I think he said he wanted to be an architect, but I should ask him. No, I mean, I think the ongoing plan in terms of Scribe is to make sure that it's got to be a dynamic plan to make sure that there are ways that there's a constant communication, constant interaction with movement in really localized Philadelphia communities, as well as nationally, so that the work of Scribe is always connected with the needs of community. And so it's, when I feel that Scribe is strongest, I feel it's when when the dialogue is really, really good with communities. And, you know, we've done projects with, you know, communities around the country, and that's felt very, very healthy. But most of the work is really with communities in Philadelphia. So I think it's understanding the work and that it has to be responsive, and it's got to be a dialogue, and because I think it's really easy in the way things are set up in this political economy that, you know, our relationships sometimes become with sources of money, and we think of audience really as earned income as opposed to the work and the and the greater endeavors, which is why, you know, a title like Cinema for Liberation is really important to say that, you know, it's not just about selling tickets. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, although please buy some tickets. So I'm looking at the time. I think I want to ask you, Marcia, you've recently stepped down from Firelight, and I wanted to ask you, how do you know when it's time to step down and make space for the next generation, and what's your hope for Firelight's future?
I am incredibly optimistic about Firelight's future. My successor is here, in fact, Loida Limbaugh. And I feel like it was the best relay race ever. That's how it feels to me, because Loida as an individual is both a filmmaker, she's an artist herself, and she's an organizer, and she knows Firelight very well, she knows the field very well, so this is like perfect. How do you know it's time? I don't know. I mean, I do think one of the features of our organizations is founders, well, first of all, we privilege the work over the infrastructure and the operations, which is right, if you ask me, because we're all mission-driven people, but it does bite you in the ass at some point if you don't think about it. And I also think it's hard when you're in the midst of it and you're in the trenches doing the work to think about succession, or to think, but you have to. And you have to think about it not just at the, like, who's going to lead it level, but really how, you know, especially now, how do you protect the core functions of your organization? How do you make sure you are developing people to take on new roles in the organization? You know, all of that. So we were not perfect on that in any way. But it's super important to do that, I think. So, you know, there's no perfect time, but, you know, 25 years is, you know, it's long enough.
Louis, Scribe is over 40 years old, and you have managed to continue to be an intergenerational space, both in staff and the community that you serve. And I imagine that you are witnessing, as we all are, there's a shift in how generations approach work, how they approach creating content, right? Like, you know, I'm sure you did not anticipate Instagram necessarily, or TikTok. How is Scribe dealing with the generational shifts, but also how have you managed to keep it intergenerational?
To me, I think when Scribe succeeds, it's when the projects are consciously and in a way sort of celebrate a kind of an intergenerational aspect. So it's it could easily be with historical projects. Scribe, a lot of the work that we've been doing, documentary work, has really dealt with history, and a lot of the area where a lot of our energy has gone has been with history. And what I've seen is the facilitation of that, of these projects is often done by people who are quite young. But it also involves people who are witnesses and participants in the history, being part of that process. So I think, yes, technologies change. There are some things that even though technologies change and platforms may change, but there are language things about if you can identify the language of the media that you're working in, if you can understand, if you can identify the language of documentary, that's useful. In the same way English has changed in the last 50 years, but still the syntax of English has not changed that much. The vocabulary may have changed. So when we succeed, I think there's a responsiveness, but also understanding that there is a language. We're a teaching institution, and we are, in many ways, sharing in a language of creating.
So I have time to ask you one more question before we open it up to the audience. And since you refused to answer what you hope your legacy will be, I'll ask you both, what are you up to next?
Well, Louis is running Scribe. What am I up to next? I am still working to support Firelight through its 25th year. We have a celebration put on your calendars, November 14th in New York for our 25th year. And beyond that, I hope to get up to some projects. Probably not film projects, but we'll see.
How about you, Louis?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely thinking about leadership and in terms of board development. Certainly, I would say the LT word, leadership transition.
You don't have to reveal anything. You can tell us about your next film.
Archive has become the kind of buzzword of and it's an important. It's not something I dismiss, but really trying to figure out ways that archives that we've created and that we are creating on a daily basis, how do they become accessible, and how do we make sure that the communities that have created these archives have access to the archives? And it's actually quite exciting, particularly when you see community folks sort of mining their archives. So I think projects, so yes, there are infrastructure and leadership projects, but I also think projects that relate to archive. And some of those archive projects end up being documentaries, but yeah.
Cool. So we'll open it up to you. If you have a question, raise your hand and a mic will be brought to you.
Hello, my name is Alici. So a question I have is, what made your organization so special is that it gave access and promoted not only resources, but a platform for creators of color. What advice do you have for aspiring filmmakers from background that have backgrounds of color to promote their own services and tell their stories in an era where everyone is creating? So just for an example, Marcia Martin came out and said, no more pain story, no more Black pain stories. I feel like a lot of creators of color like to, not to say that it's a bad thing, but we give so much trauma, we kind of glamorize the trauma that people of color have faced, and that sometimes is the main storyline with Black stories. And then I feel like something that I don't know if you two have seen from that creatives have gone through, you like Afrofuturism or positive storytelling when it comes to people of color.
So I'm sorry, what's your question then? Is about that, or was it about?
Both.
Okay.
Did I confuse you?
Sorry.
Sorry. So my question would be is, what advice do you have to aspiring filmmakers?
Okay. I thought you had another question too. I mean, my advice to aspiring filmmakers is keep working. Keep working, meaning keep creating. Surround yourself with a community of people who you trust that are also creating, because I think that community, one of the things that we have heard again and again and again about Firelight and what's valuable about the organization is the extent to which we make spaces for community, because I think artists need that. As much as they need time and space and resources, they need that community. Now, probably more than ever. And when I say keep creating, inevitably you'll have a lot of distractions that are real and demands on you that are real, and financial constraints. So even in the midst of that, you have to keep an artistic practice going, even in the midst of that.
So I think I understood your question. Well, you asked about the advice you have about filmmaking could be about production, but I think you meant about attitude. So like in trauma and in the wake of trauma, how do you connect to your audience? What kind of attitude does your filmmaking put forward? Could you talk about the pain that can come out, or also how people transform it? Do things like Afrofuturism, and what kind of like attitude can people put forward in a way that will resonate with audiences? Is that what you were asking?
More so just keeping Black, more so pushing more positive stories of color instead of glorifying the trauma that we face.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need all kinds of stories. That's my position. I think believe me, I get the trauma stories issues, but I also think it is essential to learn history, and so a lot of the work that my partner and I have done has been about history. Much of that is traumatic. That's not to say that the stories, I actually don't think they're ultimately traumatic, because there is hope even in the midst of that. There is forward thinking. There is joy even in the midst of that. But I think we need all kinds of stories. That's my position. But I do think the industry, the larger environment in which we operate, is very fickle about Black stories. So I think it's important for us to have our own kind of center and rudder about the stories that we want to tell, because we'll always hear from the outside either what is going to be popular, what's going to be important, what's going to be saleable, all of that. And I think we have to maintain an internal rudder is the best word I can come up with for that.
Hello, my name is Caitlin, and I have, sadly, a double-barrel question. I'm thinking really about being a filmmaker, a storyteller in the digital world. What is your thought process? What are your thoughts on public access? Is that still something that's useful? What is really the best space for art that is impactful, meaningful? Where do you think those things should live? Because I'm not sure if it's really on the internet, on social media, in a gallery. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on both where art should live, and is public access still useful since we have everything at our fingertips?
I would say all of the above, and I think this sort of connects to the earlier question. I mean, media. I think sometimes if one thinks of the only media platforms as being the internet or a YouTube channel, or if one thinks of the only media platform as being theatrical distribution, or then oftentimes we will follow those models and produce work that will be picked up or consumed by those particular screens and channels. But going back to this idea of thinking about media as connected to the broader community, although cost is, the more expensive the works are, I think the more pressure there is to serve the screens that have the money to pay for that. But if it's possible to produce work that's meaningful, that is not so expensive, but you know that there's a need in that community. So if you connect it to movement and let's say, a key issue in Philadelphia is, let's say, fear of ICE coming into workspaces. That's not necessarily going to be a film that is going to be at a festival, let's say. But it might be a film that could be used in community organizing, and it could be a film of high artistry, a film that could be quite aesthetically could be very successful. So I think that trying to understand that there are just many ways and many platforms that where works can be seen. And yes, community screenings are really powerful, but also being realistic and saying that if you're going to make a film that's going to be seen by 25 people, it doesn't, unless you have huge amount of means, you may not be able to get $1 million to do it. So thinking about the utility of the work, where is the work needed, and I think it can also free us from trying to make work that I think some of the trauma work is work that we know that a particular platform wants that work. So
it was distressing to hear that when you mentioned that CPB announced they were closing down. Can you talk about what that means for the individual PBS stations and World Channel, and what that means for filmmakers like many of us who have our films on PBS, what that means, and what now, and I know it's just such new news, what you think that means for what new distribution looks like in the future?
Yeah, well, it is a massive blow to the public television system. Individual stations will vary with the extent to which they are hit by this. The smaller stations will be hit the hardest. The bigger stations in the big cities will fare the best, but they will still sustain big financial hits. I think in addition to the financial hit on the stations, the prospect of new work being funded by the public system is increasingly remote. So the stations never did have a lot of production money. So the stations do not fund themselves a lot of documentaries. Many more were funded through ITVS, through some of the bigger, they call them strands, but they're series, American Masters, American Experience. Those series right now, Independent Lens, POV, are now under severe threat. American Experience has already been shut down as of last week. That was PBS's signature history series. Imagine that at a time like this, the history series, right? So in terms of the prospects for independent documentaries to be funded. That is increasingly off the table. In terms of them being able to find a broadcast home, that is also increasingly off the table. And what that does to the entire ecosystem is severe. Because of what I said before about not only how much money the public television system contributed to documentaries as a whole, but because of the type of work that was supported, if not championed, by public television. Believe me, public television was far from perfect, very far from perfect. But if you look at independent documentary producers, especially those of color, by far, you'll find most of that independent work on public television. That work going forward is highly endangered. My biggest worry, in addition to that, is the work that's already done will be captured and unavailable. I'm very worried about that. So I think, as I said, that is the reality. And I think, there are plenty of people who are committed to the ideas that animated public television, including Firelight Media and a lot of other organizations and filmmakers. Those people are not going away. There will be something that will come from the ashes of this. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what distribution is going to look like. I would urge you to look at what Color Congress is doing in terms of experiments in distribution this year, community-based distribution. I think that's going to be very important. And I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation. This is what we do, right? We innovate. We make something out of nothing. So we're going to be doing that. But the public system is not going to be an option.
Hi, my name is Malachi Chapman, and my question is for you, both of you, is what was a personal pivotal moment that you decided to listen within and not listen to distraction?
And not listen to?
Distraction, like the outside world and social media and those type of conversations where people would be like, I think you should do this, or I think you should do that, but just listen within and just go forth and just go do that and just instead of talking.
It's strange, but I'm thinking that sometimes seeing work succeed, seeing a film can make it clear that, oh, this is the kind of work that I'd like to be doing. Even more than a lecture or a bad experience, but sometimes being inspired by work. In all honesty, I saw a rough cut of this PBS series, Eyes on the Prize. And when I saw that, even though there may have been some similarities in terms of work that I was making, historical work, but seeing that, I saw just the enormous power and possibility of that, and that was tremendously liberating and empowering. So I would say, again, one of the gifts of BlackStar is the ability to see work that can inspire and ways of conjuring and playing with visual media that makes us see new possibilities.
In 2002, we thought about a film on Emmett Till. You know the story of Emmett Till. And we were like, okay, that's a good idea. This will make a great film, maybe, would it? And believe it or not, I went through whatever the phone book was in 2002, and Mamie Till's phone number was a public phone number. I called her on the phone, and she answered. And I was speechless because, and this, became a pivotal moment in the film to understand the decision she made to put her murdered son's body on public display, right? Which is a decision she made. And she said she wanted the world to see what had happened to her son, right? And so I knew about the story. I knew that she had made that decision. I knew I thought of that as a pivotal moment actually in history, this decision that she made as a mother, right? And the fact that I got her on the phone and we later went to her house where she had a little like cardboard display in her living room. And I said, this is the power of film right now. This woman is here and she's alive. And she's doing all she can do to keep the story of her son alive, right? And that is when it became imperative to make the film. It wasn't until that it was like, whatever else we do, we're going to make the film. She never got to see it, but she's in it.
We can take one more question.
Wow, that was an amazing question and answer. That's hard to follow. Just to appreciate that you're all here sharing with us. Thank you so much. And also, I think it's very auspicious that your Firelight event is on November 14th, because that's the same date that MOA, the Museum for West African Art in Nigeria, is opening, with restituted objects being returned, so very auspicious. Louis, it was really special to be at the launch of TCB last night, and I was especially drawn to this kind of dialogue and debate between Toni Cade Bambara and Toni Morrison on the power of writing compared to film, compared to social action, as mediums for both arts and politics. And I was interested in how it feels like your take on that also subtly comes through in how you put the perspectives together and also through your lived practice. And I was wondering if you would like to share on that. And also just on like the power of film or narrative as a form of production of listening to community, how you can hold together multiple perspectives and opinions, and your opinion can even be coming through in not just one, but in how you hold them together.
Yeah, I fundamentally believe that the healthiest kind of media world is when as many people as possible have the tools and the language to communicate with time-based media, can know how to construct a story, know how to share information, and really looking at it as a language, and not just a language that as a viewer one can understand, but also create with it. And so I think, and I would say that Morrison and Toni Cade were not oppositional. I think Toni Cade Bambara also understood that writing is this powerful way of sharing, and yes, it has. Yes, she was applying it in a social sense, but she also understood that there was an aesthetic and a pleasure sense that comes from writing that is not to be undervalued. So two things. So yeah, I think sharing as many people as possible, being able to communicate and being able to construct meaning with media, I think to me is something that I find really interesting and really powerful and transformative. and but also respecting that the artistry, and not when someone is a genius with words, not being able to say that, yeah, this person has a heightened ability to use it, but we all should be able to use to have these creative tools.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also, yeah, I agree with you that they weren't oppositional. And actually, I think Toni maybe could give herself credit because she did that in her work as an editor and human, actually.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Louis. Really appreciate you being on the panel.
BlackStar.
Yeah. Thank you all. And our panel is over. I don't know, is there anything else to say, Nyla? No? Okay, so.
If you want to see a happy film, go see Funk tonight, 9:30.
Yes.
And Sun Ra tomorrow, 2 o'clock.
Thank you.